Welcome back to another episode of Temple Time. I feel like I haven't sat down to actually record a new video in quite some time. I just launched my new book, Feminine Archetypes, and like the whole month of May was just like preparation mode for that. And I had recorded so many videos in the spring just to like get ready to release those. And then the videos on Aphrodite that were released last month for the Goddess workshop inside the monthly Goddess alignment. Those were all things that I had. So it feels good. I'm excited to like get back into this. And as I'm recording this, it's the beginning of June. We have a new goddess that we're honoring this month, Amaterasu, and she is the Shinto Goddess, the Japanese goddess of the sun. She is queen of the kamis. Kamis means gods in Japanese, and she's the queen of heaven. She is ruler of the universe, and you don't see a lot of solar deities. There's Sekhmet from Egyptian myths, and then there's Sol from the Norse myths. But other than that, goddesses are usually associated with the moon. So we're coming up on the summer solstice, and I really wanted to kind of stretch myself outside of, because I love Greek mythology and Celtic mythology are like, will always be a piece of me, but it's, I love kind of doing something different and mixing things up. So let's talk about Amaterasu. And I kind of want to start by talking about Japan and its culture and its mythology and kind of how that developed in order for us to better understand her creation myth, her origin story, and her, we'll go into the myth of the cave after that. So Japan didn't really have a mythology until around like the 400s Common Era, CE, and right after that, Buddhism came in. So Shintoism is the native Japanese tradition, but it is also heavily influenced with Buddhism. So in a lot of the myths, because none of the myths were actually written down until around like the 1700s in a book of the, what is that called? Kojiki. And it's like the record of ancient matters, basically. But it is filled with gods and Buddhas. So Buddhism and Shintoism have like kind of evolved together. So just kind of keep that in mind as we're like talking about the myths and as we dive more into learning about Japanese culture and mythology and Amaterasu herself this month. Japanese deities are oftentimes represent natural forces. So Amaterasu being the goddess of the sun, we have her brother, Tsuyukuyami, or I think that's right, who is the god of the moon, and then Susanoo, who is the god of the storms. And so they were very much nature deities. They kind of represented those natural forces that occurred. Whereas like in Greek mythology, you see we have the goddess of war, the goddess of love, the goddess of the hunt. Like those were things that were a part of the culture, whereas Japanese mythology is very much nature-based. So in Shintoism, there's not, like I said, the mythologies didn't start till around like the 400s. So there were two creator deities in the beginning. There was Izanagi, who is the male creator deity, and Izanami, who is the female creator deity. And they're responsible for creating the islands of Japan. So once they popped into existence, they created the islands. They then did this kind of ritual dance and kind of like, admired each other from afar and was like, oh, hey, I'm into you. Are you into me? Kind of thing. Like, okay, maybe we should unite. And, Japanese culture is very modest compared to Western culture, I feel like. So even listening to and like reading these stories, it's not like, I don't know, any of the fertility goddesses or anything like that. I think of like Inanna from like ancient Sumeria, who was like, here is my vulva, take it. Like, she's graphic. And that is not at all the case here, right? So Izanagi and Izanami are kind of doing this dance, and they decide to copulate and, after this ritual. And their first child is then born, and the child is disformed. It's disfigured. And, they're trying to figure out why this happened. And essentially, along the way, they believe that because the woman, Izanami, spoke first, it's why they had a deformed child. So they decide to do this ritual dance again, but Izanagi would speak. And this is very much symbolic of, Japan. I mean, Japan used to be a matriarchal culture, right? And then kind of this shift occurred with everywhere else on the planet, right? Around this time. And it began to become very patriarchal. So like the feminist in me screams at this, but having this like, oh, well, you spoke first, woman. So you know what? I'm going to do it this time and we'll see if we can get it right. Like, it's just, it hurts. But anywho, it is what it is. So Izanagi decides to speak first, and they do this ritual dance, and it's still unsuccessful. And Izanami eventually dies. The creator deity dies. The gods are not. Throughout several Japanese myths, they go into hiding or they leave. The gods are not mortal or immortal. They kind of, you'll see along several stories where they're out and about, and then they just retreat, or they go into hiding for years, for centuries. But in this case, the female creator deity, Izanami, dies and goes into the underworld. Izanagi is beside himself, stricken with grief, wants to go into the underworld and rescue her. But he realizes that her body is, it's said that it's covered in maggots and it's full of thunder, and there is just no saving her, essentially. So he escapes the underworld. And he decides to seal the underworld up with a boulder. And this is very significant because Japanese mythology, in Shintoism, there is no mourning periods and there are no funeral rites. So, in modern Japanese culture, you'll see a lot of Shinto weddings. There's a lot of celebration of life, but there's a lot of Buddhist funeral rites. It kind of, Shintoism and Buddhism, again, because they've been like intertwined for so long throughout history, like there's this blend of traditions. But the fact that Izanagi like seals off the underworld, right? He realizes like there is no saving her. Her body has basically dissolved. It is nothing. It's desecrated. It's just gone, right? So he decides, once he seals up the underworld, he goes and bathes. He wants to cleanse himself. And as he's, washing himself with water, the water drops mix with parts of his body. And as they drop off of him, this is how the gods are born. So Amaterasu it said like I think she came from his eye, but it really doesn't. I mean, just the water, the cleansing, the pouring the water over him. As the water drips off, Amaterasu, her brother Susanoo are born. And essentially that's how they're created. And for, the gods to not have a a mother goddess, that they're basically born from the water and the creator god. It reminds me a lot of like Athena, because she didn't have that connection. Even though Metis could be called her mom, it like her, she was essentially born from Zeus's head. And, basically it is a shift in cultural perspective, like patriarchy, right? Like the male god created these deities. So just something, I don't know. I always just find that fascinating, right? Seeing how gods are brought to life. And so that's how Amaterasu was born, from the water droplets that dropped off of Izanagi. She was the firstborn, and this caused a lot of jealousy, I think, with her brother Susanoo. He was the god of storms. And one day he decided enough was enough, and he tore up her rice fields. He kind of went on this rampage, tore up the rice fields, slaughtered her animals, defecated in her temple. And Amaterasu's response to that was to run and hide. So she took to the hills and she hid in a cave. And as she did this, she basically thrust the world into darkness. And, the other gods got together and said, hey, we can't have this. We need her, right? For the crops to grow, for, everybody. Like, we need the sun. So they got together, they had a council meeting, and decided to throw a party. They're like, we're going to throw the biggest party ever, and we're just going to lure Amaterasu out from hiding. And so they, decorate the place, and there's music and laughter, and they're just celebrating, trying to tempt her out, be like, hey, Amaterasu, don't you want to come join us? And she doesn't budge. So they decide to hang a mirror from a rope, and throw it over the tree branch, so there's a mirror, and they're like, oh, this will get her. And they're like, Amaterasu, there is even a more spectacular goddess out here than you. And this, piques her interest. So she kind of comes and, pops her head out. And as she sees this mirror, she doesn't realize, first of all, that it's a mirror. And so her reflection, right? Her radiance, her brightness is reflected back to her. And so she gets curious. She's like, who is this goddess that is better than me? Who can, is more radiant than me? And so she comes out, and essentially she gets out far enough from the cave that the other gods drag her out, and they put up this rope in front of the cave so that she cannot return. And she realizes as she's standing there in front of the mirror, oh, that is me. There is no goddess better than me. And, it's so funny because last month when we were working with Aphrodite, the mirrors are one of her symbols, and same with Amaterasu. And I've been thinking a lot about mirrors and mirror work. So as we do our guided meditation this month, there's definitely going to be some of that involved. Because it's such a beautiful metaphor. It's just beautiful symbolism. When we think that especially when we start comparing ourselves as women, I know we do it all the time. But to remind ourselves of our own beauty, our own perfection or imperfection. Perfection is we're not perfect. It's wrong word. But our own brilliance, our own radiance, our own beauty, our own strength, right? And she's reminded of this. And so she comes out of the cave. And you'll see So in temples today in Japan, you'll see like a white woven rope hanging at the temples. And that is basically in honor of Amaterasu coming out of the cave, right? Shining her light once more onto the world. And it marks a sacred space. So if you ever see a white woven rope, say that 5 times fast. That is to mark sacred space. And Japan, there is, I can't remember the name of it. There actually is a cave where they say, you could probably just like look it up online, where they say that Amaterasu hid. And they have supposedly the mirror and I think the sword and something else, another sacred object. But the mirror that was used to lure Amaterasu out. Also, fun to note that the Japanese imperial family is said to have descended from Amaterasu. That is their lineage. So it's not the creator deities. It is the goddess of the sun. And even on Japanese flags, it is the rising sun. It is very symbolic, and she has heavily influenced Japanese like symbols and yeah. So that is just kind of like a little intro to Amaterasu. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I want to add. But yes, if you've worked with her, if you're familiar with her myths, if you have anything else to add, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment below. If you're watching this on YouTube later, you can always join the monthly goddess alignment at any time and access, the guided meditations, the additional videos and stuff that I do for a goddess of the month. These get viewed on YouTube much later than they do inside my Patreon group. So I think that's it. We'll definitely be doing something around the summer solstice to kind of celebrate the light and, yeah, that's all I have for you. So thanks for watching, and I'm sending you all of my love, and I will see you next week.